Folks, welcome back to Positive Mischief. Today we have Josh Finkelstein. Josh has a very interesting story of creative and government contracting that we're going to get to talk about today. So, Josh, welcome to our little home.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So, Josh and I have known each other for a few years now, like before COVID.
Yeah. PBS when I was over there.
Yeah. So it's been fun to reconnect and to hear what you're doing now. So let's get into this. The first question that I always ask everybody is if you could describe your job to a child, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, how would you do that?
I make deals happen.
Okay. So
through creative aspirations, through creative ingenuity. How's that?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
My 6-year-old self doesn't know what ingenuity means, but I get that. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Making deals happen through creative ingenuity. What does that look like exactly?
So back when we knew each other at PBS, I was working on key art that revolved around a lot of their premier programs, Downton Abbey, PBS Kids. I didn't necessarily just do the art, though, and that wasn't really my skill set. My skill set was bringing pieces together.
Sure.
Right, whether that was typography, contractors, people who had an understanding of the show and the strategy. I tried to bring it all together and create ideas around that.
Yeah.
Whether that was experiential guerrilla marketing, ideas beyond the scope of what the marketing plan was. And so I wanted to do something with that, and I didn't know what to do with it at the time.
Right.
I just started kind of going in different directions and touching a lot of different spaces. And what I found was that it's not really deal making. What my actual job title is capture manager. And that is kind of like making a piece of key art, right? You have a lot of different pieces that go into it. Some of them more rough, right? Let's say you have raster graphics, or say you have vector graphics, or you have logos and typefaces. You bring all those different pieces together at various qualities, and you craft a deal using that creative ingenuity. And I'm trying to put it into the context of a creative mindset.
Right? Sure. So what kind of deals are we talking about? And what kind of, because it's hard to tell stories putting a deal together. So you're not really telling a story. It's not like you're crafting a Lord of the Rings version of a, contract for a government agency.
But in some cases you are, right? You're trying to tell a story to both the government contractor who wants to go after that work, as well as the government, right? So it's kind of a two-pronged approach. You have your audience, which is the government, but then you have your own firm. Why would they believe in going after that deal? Why wouldn't they just no bid it, right? And in that context, you may go after $1 billion deal, and at the final stages, the company says, "Hey, this is too risky for us. We don't want to go after it."
Yeah.
So in that context, you want to craft a storyline perspective so that it mitigates risk for the firm, but also allows your people, that is your subject matter experts, your designers, your engineers, your creative folks, to actually go forth and conquer that space.
So in a way, you're creating a story for your company.
Right.
This is who we are. This is why we believe what we believe. This is our brand messaging, and this is how we infuse this into the bid we're putting together for you.
Right.
Whereas before, maybe it was less effort on that because it was just a numbers game.
Right.
You need a plane, we make planes.
Exactly.
Here, it's going to cost you $5 billion.
Yeah.
Well, now there's so much competition.
There is.
So you have to have something that stands out. So what you guys are doing is you're now figuring out how to take your brand voice and not only infuse it into the brand at a high level,
right,
but infuse it into each of these bids that you're putting out that maybe touches the contract in a way that the provider doesn't think about that or wouldn't expect to.
Exactly. And it's not just where I work now, across the board, you're seeing smalls do this as well, right? Small businesses. You're seeing mid-sized businesses do that. Back in the day, there were only a few major players in the game, and now what you see is that there's a lot of different players.
Yeah.
And they all have to have their unique storyline perspective. What differentiates them from others?
Right.
What do they bring to the table that's different?
So what have been some fun challenges to that, or not fun challenges to that?
I think the challenges kind of revolve around discovering who exists at these companies, right? These are major firms, some of them. These are sometimes $5 or $10 billion firms with, 10 to 20 to maybe 40,000 people working there.
Yeah.
And so you're having to peel the onion and kind of discover where the hidden treasures are, where the hidden talent is, whether that's creative talent, engineering talent, and they exist, right? And it's tough to find.
Yeah.
So it takes time. It's walking the dog,
Sure. Well, because you get the RFP or the bid or whatever it is that you're getting, and you're sort of, okay, here's the main ask. Well, we can put something together that addresses this and be one of 100 that check these boxes.
Right.
Or we can do a little digging and we can find the people behind the scenes and we can become buddies with them.
Exactly. I'm working on something like that right now.
It sounds a little transactional, and look, we all do it, so let's not get upset.
Right.
But what happens, I think, with that is then you find the people they actually click with.
Yes.
You actually jive with. You're like, oh, I started this journey to be successful on this bid and, to get some inside track on it. Well, in doing that, I actually found somebody that I would have never met before. And now we're buds, or now we have a relationship on some level that's maybe personal, maybe professional, but there's something more to it than if I was just checking these boxes and we got lucky as 1 out of 100. We put the time in to treat these people like humans and to care about them and to craft something that mattered and spoke to them directly rather than just checking these boxes.
Exactly. And checking the boxes is a good point, right? A lot of these firms started out in that realm, right? From a risk mitigation perspective, from a compliance perspective.
Yeah.
But underneath it all is a really well-crafted story.
Sure.
Right? Connecting, a firm's engineers, with the engineers that sit on the government side, and how they can vibe together, right? And create those synergies to really achieve the outcomes they're looking to achieve.
Right.
Sure, from a general perspective, it is about money. But beyond that, and especially where I come from and where you come from, it is about the outcomes from a creative perspective, right? What can we do to help create these synergies across the spectrum?
Yeah. So what's that been like, trying to infuse creativity into a government bid?
I think it's interesting. I think a lot of the folks I work with find my background interesting. A lot of them come from a military background where it's very hierarchical in nature, and it's a yes sir, no sir kind of a deal, and where I'm trying to kind of mold them into people who kind of think outside of those boxes, right?
Sure.
Outside of, hey, it's a yes no kind of thing in many cases. And in a majority of the cases that and the bids that I work on, it's a maybe. Like how can we trade yin for yang? What can go on behind the scenes that leads to a much larger, deal or a much larger footprint in an arena where you're combining cross-market opportunities with cross-market subject matter expertise.
Sure.
So it's a challenge, but I find it to be very similar to what us as creatives faced when I was in more of the design thinking UX space, where it's
Well, I think everything has its unique challenge as a creative.
Right.
Some of them are more high profile. Some of them are cooler.
Right.
You get to work on a TV show or a movie that seems cooler, but there can be some massive headaches behind the scene that quickly make it not fun at all.
And make it a nightmare.
Yes. there can be the ones that on the surface seem pretty bland, and then once you start to, like you said, peel back that onion, you're like, oh, there's some really cool things going on here that I can sink my teeth into. I remember when I was teaching at GW, it was always tell the students, not every project is going to be your cool project.
Right.
So find, if nothing else, find one piece of it that inspires you and ignites you that you can sink your teeth into, that you can take creative ownership of, and let the other things take care of themselves. You got to do that anyway. You got to design whatever it is. You got to animate whatever it is. You got to write whatever it is. But if there's one part that you're like, this right here speaks to me, then like really put that as your heart and soul into it, that you can own it so that you feel like when you wake up in the morning, you don't hate what you're doing. Because you're not going to have a project that's always going to be from start to finish. I love every minute of this,
Yeah.
And it makes me get up in the morning to go do it. It just doesn't exist like that.
And I love how you mentioned creative ownership. When I went to SCAD back, in the late 2000s, I never thought for a minute I'd be working with, PhD level, engineers.
No, they don't have, that's not a major at SCAD.
No, that is not. It's not.
They expect everybody to go out and, be, wonderful artists that show up in Ad Age and that kind of thing.
I know. And I thought the same thing.
Of course, yeah.
But, what I found is actually work on the major bids. I love working the big bids. Mm-hmm. But I even more enjoy the smaller ones because that's where you find the true engineering talent.
Yeah.
And they have their own creative processes that they utilize, whether that's from a systems engineering perspective, mathematical or science perspective. I see us as creatives in them.
Yeah.
Right? They're creative in their engineering world,
mm-hmm.
And we're creative in our space, in our domain. And I think there's a lot of synergies at those levels.
Well, that's an interesting little segue to talk about creativity and how it exists in your traditional creative world, painting, movies, writing, that kind of thing, which everybody just kind of assumes it takes creativity to do that. But then you pivot over to an engineer, and what creativity looks like for them in their world. So like, talk to me about what you've seen as someone who's come from entertainment marketing, which is creative, into engineering, which to some people it's probably like, well, there's a formula.
Yeah.
Just don't make the bridge fall down.
Right. There is, but there's a million ways to do that.
Right.
And that's where the creativity lies.
Yeah.
Right. And the more you get into talking to civil engineers, the more you get into talking to, mechanical or electrical engineers, they're like, well, there's a million ways to plug in a light bulb, There really is.
Yeah.
And so when you let's go a little bit back to creativity in the UX world.
Mm-hmm.
There's a million ways to build an app.
Right.
And especially with vibe coding now, with AI becoming a major thing. Every single AI tool that exists utilizes different code bases to create a product.
Yeah.
And so, again, you're going back to that, hey, how would you design an app? Well, you can use a design system, or you can craft it from the imagination. You can even, in some cases, illustrate your own pieces of that app.
Right.
But there's many different ways to do it, and the same goes for engineers.
Yeah.
And talking to them and trying to peel that onion and say, how can you guys work well at the table? Because the same frustrations that designers face with each other and copywriters face with each other is the same frustrations that happen at an engineering table.
Sure.
Hey, my bridge is better than yours,
Right.
So,
well, I think that's a fun place to be when you're getting to see the other side of that coin, and what those challenges are and how they try to solve those challenges.
Right.
So like, what does that look like then when you're putting bids together with them, because you have to consult with them as the subject matter experts.
Right.
But then you have to take that and you have to somehow craft it into something that is entertaining on some level, right?
It is. It is.
Like, what's your goal here? Let me rephrase it a bit. What's your goal when you're working with them and you're working on a bid and you're thinking like, my job is to infuse some sort of creative component into this? What's your goal? What do you expect from the end user when they're reading that?
I'm sure you're the same. Being a professor, I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always curious, about how things work.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm driving on 95, I enjoy looking at all the different power plants and systems engineering. I never understood how it worked,
Right.
but it was always intriguing to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm working with engineers, I try to, like you said, dumb it down for an 8th grade level.
Right.
How would you explain this to me if I had no background in this field?
Yep.
And I'm just evaluating it from a checkbox perspective.
Yeah.
Right. How would you explain this to me? And as you go through that storyboarding process with them,
Yeah.
or whatever you want to call it, the engineering step-by-step approach to
Right.
it, it's peeling that onion. It's understanding how they go about, thinking through a challenge and
Mm-hmm.
creating a solution around it. And in many cases, you're having to clean up. Like, many of them go about writing tech volumes as part of their process. And I tend to go through it.
That sounds so laborious.
It is. It is. But they're also, many of them are used to writing white papers, which are
Right.
about 2 to 3 pages long. And in some cases, a tech volume is 30 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going through it and kind of cleaning it up and seeing where you need to create the connections, what's
Yeah.
missing, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did you have to do to prepare yourself to make that leap, or was it just, did you kind of fall into this,
I have
or
an
did you
interesting.
seek it out? Talk to me about that journey, because look, as I'm thinking about this in the world that and that I understand, that I know fairly well, of creating marketing plans for entertainment marketing and TV shows and all that kind of stuff, that there's an order to that, as weird as it sounds.
Right.
There's a creative order to that. But then how do you prepare yourself? Or what's that journey like where you're like, okay, I'm going from here, I'm going to end up here, and I don't even know that I'm going to end up there. But
Right.
at some point along the way, you had to realize that I don't know this stuff.
I had an epiphany. I had been trying to push my way into a creative director role for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and I kept getting pushback.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I was always a number 2. And so taking a good hard look at yourself and coming to some realizations about what your true talent is and what your true talent isn't started to kind of fester within me. And what I found was that I'm good at strategy,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm great at strategy, but not necessarily good at the execution
Okay.
of the deliverables, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a really great artist. I didn't necessarily have process to doing that. I could use the tools.
Right.
I consider myself an okay designer. Okay, I'm not miracles. I'm not creating the key art from scratch from a white
Yeah.
PSD.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. And so I realized at some point that I had to pivot, and I was trying to pull at strings. I'd been doing digital design for a decade and longer. And yet, I started off in the kind of the development spaces back in the, late 90s, and kind of made my way more into design.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found, what I enjoyed about advertising was the innovation aspect,
Sure.
the idea of strategy. And so I started to pull that out of the creative hemisphere and say, where else does strategy play?
Okay.
And what it played in was this management consulting space,
Yeah.
not the one you see on TV where they're all, just trying to make a buck,
Yeah.
but the part where that infuses creativity. And so I start to fall into kind of the UX circles within Booz Allen, but then I also kind of wanted to understand what it meant to be a program manager or product manager, right? And understand strategy in that realm.
Yeah.
And as I dipped my toes into that, I kind of fell into what it was to do business development and capture.
Sure.
And so as I did that, I was like, ooh, this is nice. Oh, I get to write stories
Yeah.
for engineers.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. These people are getting Nobel Prizes.
Right.
What am I doing here?
Yeah.
And what you realize is that you can help tell their story from a creative perspective
Yeah.
that connects with people who don't necessarily have that engineering background and are just evaluators, right? Of those stories, of those opportunities, of those innovations. And so by doing that, I found a niche for myself. And so
Yeah.
I've always really wanted to showcase this story to others because I think there's a lot of creatives out there who kind of fell into their little nooks
Yep.
and are looking for their next step, whether that's a product manager, whether that's a capture manager, something
Yeah.
where they're kind of connecting the dots from a creative perspective. And so that's how I did it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of luck involved.
Sure. Well, I think you said something really interesting about how you tell a story about engineering
Yeah.
to people who are not engineers, but they're just evaluators.
Right.
You know, I think there's something interesting about the way that government contracting and procurement is set up, that those who make decisions aren't always the people who know the topic the best.
Yes. All right.
You know?
I can get into that. So there's two different aspects to a government evaluation of a proposal, right? This is a $1 billion proposal. Some of them are smaller.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are smaller. And those are the ones I like to focus on. But the larger ones, you have two different segments of the government. You have the evaluation office, and I'll just speak in layman's terms here.
Yeah.
You have the evaluation office, and then you have the people who actually work on that, you know, on those deliverables, on that actual work, right? You have the subject matter expertise here, and then you have the evaluators. They don't always like each other. They don't
Shocker.
always agree with each other. It's like, you know, lawyers in a courtroom, right? And no one really enjoys working with them.
Right. Yeah, the subject matter expert is very clear. We need all of these things. And the
Right.
evaluator is like, well, you're not going to get all of those things. And here's the reasons why. Because
Exactly.
we have red tape. And
Right.
you're like,
But how am I supposed to do that? I'm like,
go away with your red tape.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so you're having to tell the story of both sides and how you can meld the two together and figure out where, you know, you can avoid risk, where you can, you know, adapt your risk, you know, where's there risk mitigation in there. There's when it comes, people wonder what red tape is, and what red tape really revolves around is money and risk. That's it. That's what the government's trying to avoid. Too much spent on too much risk.
Right.
So how can you lessen both of those in certain subtle ways? And that's where that creativity comes into play. That's where that strategy comes into play.
Yeah.
So that's what I've tried to kind of figure out ways to do. So
Well, it's interesting. That's very fascinating, especially in this town
right.
where there are a lot of creative outlets. There are a lot of creatives, I call it sort of like hiding in the shadows
Right.
of government buildings,
Oh yeah.
you know.
I know a few myself.
Right? And, you know, everywhere from nonprofits to associations to, you know, the brands who are here in the area. And then you've got government, and government is such a massive part of that. And I think it overshadows those other three things that we just talked about.
Right.
You know, the nonprofits, associations, and brands, which are all doing really cool stuff and have really talented designers and creatives who are helping to tell those stories. But you don't always get to work in those three. Sometimes we have to work with the big monster, you know, and monster is kind of a scary word because it's not all monstrous. We've had some really fun government clients
Yes.
and enjoy the heck out of it. We've had some that are a bit more, you know, straight-laced and, you know, that's fine too.
Yeah.
But I think within that world, realizing that there's a whole different part of creativity
Yeah.
that is nothing about output. Like we work in output, you know, so we take an idea and we have to bring it to, you know, together to send it out to the world.
Right.
So it can be seen in some way, shape, or form. But before that even happens, this is where you come into this. Like there's a whole world where a creative individual can find a spot
Right.
to unleash that. It may not be what, you know, the SCAD, you know,
It's not
book
always,
says.
it's not the sexy,
Right.
cool stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's those little shadows and corners where you can find that, you know,
Yeah.
and whether that's, you know, working for a federal, you know, agency, you know, like I knew people at the IRS who were phenomenal designers, and they spent the majority of their life working on phenomenal products for citizens. And that was really, and the same thing could be said for the folks at the VA and,
Yeah.
These are citizen focused efforts, and as much as people like to hit upon these organizations, they've done everything they can within their power to really help drive the connective tissue between the citizen and their bureaucratic processes.
Right.
So
which
I have a lot of
which are vast.
Yes, they are. So
yeah. Well, that's very interesting. I think the idea of finding a spot within a government world, what did you have to? I figure out how to ask this question. Did you feel like you were like losing a part of your creative soul?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what was that? What was that journey like for you to be like, crap? Was this moment of realization, like, I'm not going to do the sexy thing ever again, and I'm okay with that? Or was it like, you know what? I'm actually really excited about this new chapter. Or was it a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I got very lucky getting to PBS. I was about to move to Silicon Valley and test my luck in the world of Thanos and all those other fun little ideas out there. And at the last minute, PBS calls me and says, "Hey, would you like to come, make some digital advertising for us?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'll give that a shot." And I got to work on PBS Kids, which was, some of the most coolest stuff I've ever touched.
Yeah.
Never thought in a million years I'd do that. And then I worked on a lot of their Ken Burns and Downton Abbey stuff. And again, I felt like I reached the pinnacle of my career, right? I knew what my limits were. And I was like, I want to give the opportunity to others. I don't want to take that away from others. I touched it. I had experienced it. They're behemoth of brands. I'm like, okay, I did it. Now where can I go from here?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, I'm in DC, and Washington DC is known for government consulting, and I've always kind of avoided it. And yet I was like, well, let me dip my pinky into here and see what's going on. And when I did, I was like, wow, this is interesting. This is really impactful work.
Yes.
And that was one of the things that really got me into it. I'm like, wow, I'm making a huge impact by helping, bridge together all these, dispersed elements into some sort of path forward, whether that's giving that back to the subject matter experts, design thinkers, engineers, and all the folks that help contribute to a citizen service, or even back to the government, where it's like, hey, how can we effectively spend taxpayer money so that it has outcomes that achieve what we're looking to achieve? And so I was like, I might as well give it a shot and see what comes out of it. And what came out of it was where I'm at now.
Yeah.
So, you never really know where your path is going to lead.
No, you don't. And I think that's the really fun thing about being open to those, and willing to take a chance on yourself, if you will, and just see where you land. You know? There's lots of times doors close where we think it should open up.
Right.
And you're like, this doesn't make any sense at all.
I wanted to do Sesame Street. That's what and I was like, okay, this could be cool. Go up in Boston, go hang out with these little animals and stuff. And I was like, after a while of thinking about it, I was like, maybe I should take a pivot again. I had pivoted a few times in my career. I started off in advertising, made my way into UX, and then I pivoted one more time into more strategy. Yeah. And I enjoyed the strategy part. Yeah. I connect a lot with the people at that level. They see me a certain way, I see them a certain way, and that synergy, those vibes that you mentioned earlier, really are connecting well where I am now.
That's cool.
And that's a real weight off my shoulder where it's more. And a lot of these folks at the levels that I'm working, they're executives, but they also want to give back, right? They want to be able to give opportunities to the people around them, and so our goals are very much aligned in that regard.
That's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting to see what's out there, especially in this town. And I love being able to bring a different creative perspective to that that maybe people don't think about. So this has been very interesting.